Good evening, everyone. This is Preeti Kheda, Associate Fellow at Usanas Foundation. Before we begin the discussion, let me just introduce our moderator, Professor Gitanjali Sinha Roy. She is Assistant Professor and Director at Pankaj Jha Centre for Security Studies, UP Global University. And today we have Dr. Yoichiro Sato with us. He is a professor and former Dean College of Asia Pacific Studies and former Dean Graduate School of Asia Studies at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. So over to you, Professor Gitanjali.
Thank you, Preeti. So firstly, a very good evening to everyone. And thank you so much, Professor Sato. I would call you Sensei. Sensei means sir in Japanese. So whenever I refer to Sensei, you'll understand I mean sir. So thank you so much, firstly, for coming in. Today, we'll be talking a lot on India-Japan relations because that is one of the most important relations. And in the present geopolitical scenario, India-Japan relations stands to gain even more. So, Sensei, may I please request you to give your opening remarks and then we'll go on with the questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important webinar.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Sato. Can you please speak a little louder? Your voice is a bit low.
Oh, okay. How is it now? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, this is much better.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Please carry on.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important webinar. And I thank Usanas Foundation as well as Dr. Gitanjali for inviting me here. And India and Japan are facing this very difficult time of international relations together. And the bilateral relationship has grown since the turn of this century, I would say, although a lot of credit has been given to former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo for enhancing the bilateral ties. But I think we can go back to the much earlier period. For example, Prime Minister Koizumi's period, the Japan-India relationship has grown quite a bit. And in a way, even the United States under President Clinton decided to improve the US relationship with India. And Japan has been trying to keep pace with the US, but what actually happened was that Japan outpaced the United States in the following years in terms of improving the relationship with India. And today, I think we can say with more confidence that the Japan-India relationship is not following the US-India relationship, but the bilateral Japan-India relationship has come to possess its own dynamics. So I think it is very important to look into those unique aspects of the bilateral relationship, which is not necessarily against the United States in a way. The book, I think I forgot the title of the book, The Coming War with Japan. If you remember the book by someone with his language teacher or something like that. But anyway, the book in very early post-Cold War period was portraying India and Japan together as a challenger to the US hegemony. But I think we're not quite there yet. although both countries are opposed to hegemony by anybody, whether it's China or Russia or the US, but this cooperation between India and Japan does not pose a challenge to the US leadership. Rather, the bilateral cooperation between India and Japan try to first deter the aggressive behavior of China, and Japan wants to deter Russia as well, but I think India's special relationship with Russia somehow limits India's role in this sense. That doesn't mean that India's pro-Russia or India's approving Russia's invasion of Ukraine or anything like that. However, I think India's cooperation with Japan to deter against Russia is limited, and this limitation doesn't pose major obstacle to further growth of bilateral cooperation between India and Japan. And both countries want to preserve a multilateral order and also inclusive regional cooperation. And this refers to the current US administration's attempts to impose a very nationalistic tariffs on trade with Asian partners. And the kind of multilateralism Japan has supported, inclusive of both China and India earlier when Japan was pursuing the RCEP, but unfortunately India dropped out of RCEP, and this has a lot to do with India's domestic politics. And here again, however, India would rather prefer to deal with the US in multilateral fashion than bilaterally negotiating the tariffs. So even though India is not a member of RCEP, India and Japan are able to cooperate on preserving the more multilateral international trade environment. So with that, I think I will stop and ask for the questions from Gitanjali.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you so much. You've kind of round up India-Japan relations, making sure we've covered a little bit on US because India-Japan relations without US, of course, doesn't fit in. And we know very well that over the period of time, Japan has become closer to India also because of India's relations with the US. So I'm so glad you were able to cover that aspect. May I just start with the first and the most prominent question? We know very well that India-Japan relations historically have developed, right? But what are the current changes which we see in that relationship, which is making sure that relationship goes ahead in the future? What are the factors? What are the reasons that you see that you are seeing between India and Japan right now? And those relations are actually, I would say, the root for future relations.
Okay. Well, let me start by looking at the common threat perception. China's military expansion has been posing a common threat to both India and Japan. Of course, there are some regional uniqueness. For example, the Chinese behavior around the Senkaku Islands per se doesn't pose a direct threat on India. and neither Chinese skirmish with India over Ladakh, for example, doesn't pose immediate direct threat to Japan. Some realists might say that in the event of war, India-Japan cooperation would pose kind of force two-frontier strategy onto China. But I think that is a little far-fetched because India and Japan are not in alliance. But instead, both countries are sharing the concern about China breaking various international norms and the use of force in territorial disputes, for example, is something both countries are concerned about. So with that, both countries can cooperate diplomatically to protest against China and forge even a broader political alliance against China's behavior. And
Okay. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, I think the second area is actually the economy. And Japan sees China still as an important partner, economic partner for trading and also for investment. But the China's growth has slowed down, and on top of that, the ongoing U.S. effort to partially de-link China is altering the regional economic environment. And India offers a very attractive, not a complete alternative, but a very important substitute or supplement to Japan's economic interest. And some of the businesses may leave China and relocate into India. And India sees the opportunity to benefit from this ongoing economic realignment. So we'll see more of that coming. The Japanese companies, are moving away from China and moving into India. So that is another new dynamic in the bilateral India-Japan relations.
Okay. Sensei, you covered economic relations. After historical and cultural relations, economic relations have always been the focal point for India-Japan relations. Right now, also, as you mentioned, that so many companies want to come into India and work in India. But there is unfortunately a major dependence that the Japanese companies have on China. And recently, also, I think it was one of the leading newspapers. They said that though Japanese companies want to do away with the control that China has with regard to their companies being stationed in China, Japanese companies still do not want to give away or move away from the comfort they have in China. So if that persists, how can India drive those companies to come and become a part of the Indian economic system? If you could give us a couple of suggestions, because that is something India is trying to look at, and these are problems that we are not finding solutions to.
I see. Yeah. For the Japanese companies have moved into China, not only for the cheap labor cost, but also the quality of the workers. The Chinese workers are well educated in terms of the basic literacy and math skills and so forth. And they were very suitable for the factory jobs because they can understand the instructions for operating factory machineries and so forth. I think India needs to offer a more consistent quality workers in order to receive more manufacturing industry investments. And the other advantage Japan saw in China was that although China was a socialist economy and still claimed to be socialist, actually the Chinese government was really suppressing the labor unions to keep the wages down. And whereas in India, you have more true socialism, and the workers' unions have a very strong power, and this makes it unfortunately less attractive for the Japanese companies which seeks advantages in cheap labor. And the other problem, I think, is the infrastructure development, which is still lagging in India compared to China. And Japan has invested a lot of money into China's infrastructure development, the road and ports and electricity and so forth. But the aid has shifted to India after 2008, when Japan basically graduated China from massive ODA loans, and the loans have been diverted to newly emerging economies, including India and Indonesia, recently Vietnam also. So with that kind of infrastructure development to have a real impact, it takes a decade or possibly longer. And so I think India is just barely reaching that stage when the Japanese infrastructure investment is bringing in new investments that follow the infrastructure development.
So we spoke about infrastructure development, and one of the, I would say, grandest infrastructure development, and we're looking at greater development with India-Japan. So the bullet train is one of the most sought after things, because we're looking at it from the perspective of making sure. Because I remember when I had gone to Japan, I went into the bullet train. It was a very mesmerizing experience. Apart from making sure that you cover very long distances at a very short period of time. So I think that kind of development, once it starts functioning, the bullet train project in India starts functioning, would actually make life more convenient and easy. I think that would be a very big form of exchange between India and Japan with regard to infrastructure. The other development, I think most of us who have been living in Delhi, has been the Delhi Metro. And we are very comfortable because of that. I mean, our college life has been very comfortable. Our work life is very comfortable. Anybody who stayed in Japan knows very well the importance of trains. So I think anybody who's also used the Delhi Metro knows the importance of the kind of effort that Japan has put in with India here. Again, I'll take it forward from economics. I'll move more towards the Indo-Pacific, because that's something all of us are more interested in. Sensei, if I may honestly ask you, we know very well that India, Japan have been working a lot in the domain of the Indo-Pacific, maritime relations, Quad. But how effective is the India-Japan partnership within the broader framework of the Quad and the other minilateral forums at present? What is actually happening there? If you could tell us a bit on that.
Okay. Well, I think the Quad framework has been very helpful in terms of the capacity development of both the Indian Navy and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces. The joint exercises, the Malabar, has become a very symbolic exercise of this Quad cooperation. But beyond the capacity building, I think the military cooperation is still quite limited, and a lot of the prospects have been discussed about, but many of them haven't materialized. And I think the most notable example would be the US-2 seaplane that the Japan's Shinmei was hoping to export to India. And this deal hasn't happened over God knows how many years, and people are saying it's dead, basically. So, I think the technology corporation also face some obstacles, partly because of India's very heavy reliance on the Russian-built systems, and it's very difficult to invite India into a kind of joint development. But I think there are some discussions from the Indian side that maybe Japan can buy BrahMos missiles and things like that. And the BrahMos have recently demonstrated its effectiveness during the conflict with Pakistan. But Japan has its own indigenous development plan to kind of wean it off from dependence on the U.S. suppliers. So, Japan talks about the counter-strike capability against the missiles in North Korea and possibly also China. And the Japan procured the Tomahawk missiles for for the most immediate needs. But for midterm future, Japan is aiming at the domestic production of the improved anti-surface missiles. So that kind of the indigenous production orientation in both Japan and India will probably limit the cooperation to some degree. But who knows in the future? Like Japan's developing a fighter plane with Italy and UK, and maybe some joint development in other types of weapons may happen in the future.
Thank you, Sensei. Sensei, you mentioned about the recent event that happened between India and Pakistan. I mean, honestly, Japan has always been very kind enough to support India whenever there is any problem, whether it's with Pakistan or with China also. But one thing that a lot of people have asked me is that you've studied in Japan, you know about India-Japan relations, but what else can Japan do apart from giving support in the verbal manner? What else can India get from Japan in case there is a problem that India has with regard to China, for that matter, or Pakistan in the recent times? What else can Japan do for its friend India?
That's a hard question. I think Japan is very much on the side of India when it comes to terrorism, and what happened in Kashmir is just it's a terrible thing. And the Pakistan's, you know, the use of terrorism as kind of tactic in the conflict against India is not something Japan can approve of. But on the other hand, I think Japan doesn't want to take side in a war between Pakistan and India, especially when the war spreads, you know, beyond the Kashmir and disputed region. So, so in that sense, it's very difficult for Japan to take side in this conflict. So it's good. It's good that the U.S. has played some role in the brokering ceasefire between the Pakistan and India, and Japan's really appreciating the President Trump. I don't know how much Trump did, but the U.S. The brokering of the peace between the two countries. So, so in sum, I think there's not much Japan can do in the conflict between India and Pakistan. And frankly, I don't think India needs Japan to be kind of involving itself in this conflict. I think India is confident that it can handle this conflict on its own. But the problem is China. You know, what China do in regard to Pakistan's relations with India. And if China uses Pakistan as a pawn to confront India, to irritate India, then that becomes really problematic. But at the same time, I think India needs to see its neighbors sometimes by not linking them with China all the time. In other words, you know, whatever China does to India's neighbors, maybe India can, instead of seeing the China-aided neighbors as a problem or a threat, maybe India can try to lure them onto its side and try to kind of counterbalance try to positively counterbalance China's influence in the region.
Okay.
And for that, Japan can help. And let me give you an example. India is concerned about its northeastern territory, which is connected by a very narrow corridor to the rest of India. And for this northeastern regions, to have a kind of useful access to international trade, it has to go through Bangladesh to reach the major port. And the road development between Bangladesh and northeastern India is a very important infrastructure project, and Japan is actually taking part in this development. So with Japan's aid, India can try to create a win-win situation with Bangladesh, and this will kind of offset China's growing ambition for port access into Bangladesh. So that kind of help is possible from the Japanese side.
Okay, Sensei. You mentioned about Northeast, you mentioned about Bangladesh. I'll also take you to a little bit more towards the Andaman Nicobar. What is your take on the Andaman Nicobar Islands? A lot has been discussed for a long period of time. There are a lot of references made to Andaman Nicobar with regard to Okinawa sometimes. You know, a comparative juxtaposing each other. What is your take on that?
The archipelagic line. Yeah, I think the Andaman and Nicobar are very strategically located at along the sea lanes coming out of the Malacca Straits, and as Japan has become more active player in the Indian Ocean region, whether you are talking about the anti-terrorism operations during the early 2000s, or the anti-piracy operation in the Sea of Arabia and the Somalian coast. It is very important for Japan to have a convenient logistics, and Japan's the first overseas base in Djibouti doesn't offer sufficient logistics for Japan, and if Japan can stop by ports on the way to Djibouti for refueling, resupplying, and for repairs, for the rest of the crews and so forth, that would really help Japan's naval operation in the Indian Ocean region. And I think the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are very good candidates for that.
Okay, Sensei. Because you are a teacher, you're a professor, and Sensei in Japanese, and you're also associated with such a good university. I myself have been a student who's studied in India, then done part of my education in Japan, and I learned a lot from Japan. And of course, now I'm taking forward Japanese studies in India. What do you think, and how can we have more students going from India to Japan to study, not only the language, but various other subjects? And what do you think would be the future for them if they plan to stay back there? Because that's one question a lot of people have, and we have a lot of students. So I just thought I'll ask you that.
Well, as you know, I've been to India quite often in the recent years, and I have talked to many university staffs in the business of student exchanges, and I often heard from them that although the student exchange doesn't incur any additional tuition payment, the living cost in Japan would be still quite substantial for average Indian students. And if there's some support to at least partially pay for the living cost, then more Indian students will be able to come to Japan to study. And Actually, right now, the Ministry of Education in Japan is soliciting proposals from Japanese universities to kind of launch programs to enhance India-Japan academic exchanges. And many universities will apply for this grant. It's a 3-year grant starting with a maximum of 20 million yen per year per university. And actually, it's not just India. There's an Africa program also. So Japanese government is trying to encourage more academic exchanges between Japan and India and Japan and Africa. So I hope that with these opportunities, more Japanese university will enhance the exchanges with India and African countries, African universities.
You asked a very interesting thing and you led us to something. Sensei, a lot of people ask about the AAGC. A lot of information is not out about the AAGC because you just mentioned about Africa, and I just said, okay, let me just ask him one last tiny question, then we'll open the floor for questions. But Sensei, unfortunately, a lot of information on the AAGC is not there. And if you even want to, compare if there's some kind of development that has happened from the time it got initiated to the kind of development it's happened now, there isn't much information. Why is that actually the situation?
Can you explain the acronym?
Asia Africa Growth Corridor.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Why not much information is available on that? Well, isn't that partly because not that much new is happening? That would be my short answer. When this the concept was announced, it was pretty clear that a lot of what Japan was going to do was a repackaging of what Japan was already doing. So in that sense, I think not much new to talk about. But also, I think Japan-India cooperation on this is still lagging, and both countries need to, put more serious effort into this if they really mean to counterbalance the growing Chinese influence in the region. China's, aid. Some people say, they are, kind of a deliberate efforts to trap the poor countries into a heavy indebtedness to China and take over the major infrastructure like ports. But without going to that extreme, I really think that China's still not a full capitalist country, not a full market economy, and the Chinese, assessment of the project feasibility is often poorly done, and they are also very vulnerable to political influence meddling, and a lot of the Chinese officials, they're interested in making money through that kind of project, even when the project itself is not very profitable. So considering all those factors, I think countries like Japan and also the Western countries, which have a much better the feasibility assessment for development projects, they need to be involved more, because otherwise, China, Africa, bilateral infrastructure development cooperation, you find corruptions on both ends. There's no way that kind of cooperation can result in, useful and productive infrastructure, which contributes to long-term development.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you so much. I've asked you quite a lot of questions, and thank you so much for answering them so patiently. Preeti, with your permission, if I may, please open the floor for questions for the audience.
Yes, yes, you can.
Thank you. Please feel free to ask, sir, whatever questions you may like.
Is there any
Hello.
questions from the audience? Yes, Vivita, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, hello, sir. It's a great pleasure meeting you in this meeting. And I have, while you were talking about the Japan-India relationship, how India does not want Japan's direct participation or the Japan's direct support to resolve its regional issues with Pakistan or China. And I was wondering, like, it is a great statement that you have included India's autonomy with its regional issues, but I wanted to explore more deeper and how you are thinking about India and Japan's relationship in the global south world order, because as we are seeing, the world is becoming more multiplex with so many regional powers gaining power in the global south led world order. So unlike the US hegemonic and a single led world order, there are so many powers emerging, especially from the global south. So I just wanted your visions and your feedback about India and Japan's role in the emerging world order led by the global south powers.
This is very,
Thank you.
very good question. Thank you very much. I have just submitted a journal article which addresses this question, and you will see it very soon. But my short answer: Japan sees India as the most preferred bridge between Japan and the so-called global south. What Japan is afraid is the Chinese and Russian joint takeover of the global south and turning this the group into a anti-US or anti-West camp. There are plenty of evidence that China and Russia, for example, trying to de-dollarize the world economy, and they're trying to promote the trade based on renminbi and Russian ruble, and trying to lend money to countries near default like Egypt, but the loan is denominated in non-US dollar currencies. So this the expanded the BRICS is potentially becoming anti-West, anti-US grouping, but India is one of the major actors which resist this takeover of the expanded BRICS by China and Russia, and also as you talked about India, Africa, the corridor project. The India is a very important bridge which connects Japan with the developing countries. And Japan has its own, the bilateral relationship with many of the developing countries. And, Japan's been a trusted partner of many developing countries. In the preparation to the G20 meeting India hosted, the 1 year before that, Japan had a G7 summit meeting. Prime Minister Kishida hosted in Hiroshima. And to the Hiroshima G7 summit, Japan actually invited many countries from the global south. And the India was also invited, and the chair countries of the African Union, chair country of the Pacific Island Forum, and several of the ASEAN members, Australia. Japan invited so many countries into the G7 meeting, and this was very much illustrative of Japan's hope to maintain good relationship with the global south, and also Japan's hope that India leads and connect the global south with the West and with Japan.
Thank you so much, sir. And there are so many great perspectives which you have told us, such as the China-Russia duo. And yeah, I am expecting, and we are expecting your latest publication regarding this multiplex issue. And arigato, sensei.
Thank you for the question.
Any more questions, anybody? Please ask.
Ma'am, may I?
Yes, please. Harsh, please go ahead, please.
So, good evening, sir. Thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. Sir, this question is pertaining to the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen. Sir, do you think we can blend these two philosophy, Kaizen and Vasudeva Kutumbakam, to increase more cooperation in terms of, let's say, student activities, or let's say cultural blending? Like, how do you take, because there are a lot of players who practice Kaizen in their lives. Like, I come from a sports background, so we practice Kaizen. So what's your take on this?
I see. Well, thank you very much for your questions. The concept of Kaizen potentially has a universal applications. I think, we might think it's kind of unique to Japan, but, I think basically it's about, improving things in a systematic way, and also about listening to the workers at the direct site of operations, and it's a kind of morale against the top-down management, and it has a kind of origin in Japan's the small and medium enterprise tradition. And it dates back to hundreds of years ago, when the small kind of household economies and family-owned businesses were the core of the Japanese economy during the Edo period and before. So I think any country can adopt the philosophy of Kaizen and, kind of register the top-down management of those big Western corporations. the hindsight of this though is when the corporations become like a family, the, some workers start neglecting their own families. So like husband not coming home until late and drinking, outside with co-workers and stuff like that. So I think you need a good balance between the corporate family and the real family.
Okay, so thank you so much. And okay, I just thought I was on mute, sorry. So thank you so much, everyone. Sensei, thank you so much for answering all our questions. And I'm sure it's way past the time we'd requested you for. So thank you again for not only coming in, but also spending so much time with us. And I know it must be around 9:30. 9:30 or 10?
No, it's only 9:05.
Okay.
Yep.
So
No problem.
okay, lovely, lovely. Thank you so much again. And Preeti, would you
Thank you
like to
very
say
much.
something?
Yes, yes. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Dr. Sato, for your insightful remarks, and Professor Gitanjali for moderating this wonderful session. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining.
Namaste.
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 Namaste. Arigatou gozaimasu. Sensei, thank you so much.